Living my bucolic life, free healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello. All right, this is going to be quite a project, and I have actually been hanging on to this pattern for quite some time, and I am ready to go. So this is her. This one right here. Yeah, I know, right? It is Vogue 1738. This is a reissue of a 1948 pattern, and it just looks fabulous. So why not? Really, why not? All right, so what I'm going to use to make up this amazing dress is going to be the main fabric, which is a imitation suede. It's like this electric blue polyester suede-ish looking fabric. You know, it's technically washable, but you know, probably won't throw it in the washing machine, but technically washable and everything. I think it'll give it a fun, regal look. To line the main part of the coat, I am actually going to be using flannel. I bought a whole bolt of black flannel, super gonga deal, 10 bucks for a bolt. How do you miss that? But so I have a bunch of this black flannel, and I'm going to line everything except the sleeves. The sleeves, I will use a lining fabric just because I want it to be easy to insert my arm with something else, even like a sweater or something. So a silky type lining fabric is going to be used in the sleeves. And then for all of this kind of stuff up here, I have a chunk of this faux fur. You know, it looks like that. So it's kind of a mottled type look to it, which is fun. I'm very excited. I have not even opened this yet. I have not started looking at the instructions, much less cutting out the pieces, so it will all be a surprise to me, but here we go. All right, I just wanted to give you a quick look at what the inside here looks like. So it looks like we've got large back, a couple pieces for a front, lots of ties. We do make our own shoulder pads with this one, which is really interesting. So they have a complete instructions on making your own shoulder pads, so that is always fun. We have a two-part sleeve, and we have, what is this? Sleeve front, sleeve back, front facing. Well, we have all kinds of pieces here. Two-part sleeve, all kinds of things. So what it looks like I need to do is cut just about everything out of the blue, and then out of my contrast is going to be a cuff. Okay, so this is my big collar up here, but this is the cuff, and you can see on the drawing they have where when you raise your arm you see an extra little cuff inside, so that's kind of nice. So I want to show you what I've decided to use. Okay, so this is very, very thick, ridgy taffeta, and I've had this a long time. I actually had made curtains out of it probably about 15 years ago, And then after I was done with using them as curtains, I washed them in the washer and dryer, folded them up and put them away because this is just a huge piece of white taffeta. So I have decided, because winters here could be cold, but I want something fabulous. So I am possibly going to double line the inside. So what I'm thinking is I will have, the blue fabric on the outside, the layer of the flannel on the inside, and then my taffeta as an additional liner over that. So we only see the taffeta and the blue, but the flannel's in there for just an extra little bit of insulation. And I think that by doing that, it's going to look a whole lot better with the white fur collar up here and the white lining on the inside. So it's just getting more and more dramatic every time I look at it. So I am going to be cutting out the size 16. In general, that works for my body size and body shape. And it does, flare out at the bottom. So that should work with my hips. So I am, going to get started cutting it all out. Okay, these are my 2 sleeve pieces, and here is my diagram. Do you see this sweet girl with her skinny little arm? Well, that's not me, and I need a bigger sleeve because I don't have her sweet skinny little arm. So what I have done, this bullseye here marks the fat part of my bicep, okay? And if I overlap these 2 pieces by 1.25 inches at this point, that's going to take into account 2 5/8 inch seam allowances, all right? So then, if I measure straight across here, and I have this kind of set up so that my grain lines are running along with the grid on my table, just so I can make sure I have it all straight here. So, measuring straight across my bullseye from the edge of my pattern to the edge of my pattern is 16 inches. If I move it in 1.25 inches, again, to give myself 2 5/8 inch seam allowances on the outside edge, that gives me a sleeve diameter of 14 3/4 inches, all right? Now what I did is I put a measuring tape around my arm, and I put it in a position where it's going to be nice and loose, and you can see where I feel like I could get, if I was wearing a bulky sweater, I could get it under there and things like that, because that's what will be comfortable to me. And that came up to 17 inches. I think with the sleeve at 17 inches, I could get, whatever I'm wearing underneath there and still have ease of movement, okay? So, because this is only 14 3/4, hang on, I have to get my tablet to do some math here. So if I need 17 inches and I have 14 3/4 inches, well, if I carry that 2, so I need 2 1/4 inches, okay? Because 2 1/4 plus 14 3/4 is going to give me 17. So that means on each sleeve, I'm going to need to add 1 1/8 inch, all right? Which is basically a fat 1/2 inch on each side. And because it's a 2-part sleeve, there's a few different ways that we can do this. All right, so I've got my pivot and slide board out here, and I think it's going to be the best way to do this. Now, I'm going to be adding 1/2 inch to each side, but like I said, I need a fat 1/2 inch. So when I do this and I'm drawing my lines, instead of cutting it out when I cut out my new pattern on the inside of my marker, I'll just cut out the outside of my marker, and that should give me that extra 1/8 inch. You'll get what I mean a little bit later. If you've never seen this before, it's a pivot and slide method. So the first thing I do, and this is just my, it's like a canvas, that I can poke pins into, and that's just a protective paper. This is tracing paper. So you need 2 markers. One is where you are, one is where you want to be. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do with this one of where I am is trace out the entire pattern all the way around of the entire piece. And I'm actually going to do that for both of these, but I only need to show you one on camera because it's the same technique for both of them. So whatever I'm doing for one, just know it's going to be done to the other one too. So give me a few minutes while I trace this out. This is all outlined. You know, you can see my orange around here. And I'm going to put my ruler so I can measure 1/2 inch outside of this point here, and also I'm going to put a mark 1/2 inch over on the other side, okay? Thereabouts. So now that I have these two, I'm going to put this pen up here. Let me move this so you can see. In the little circle at the top that's for my size, and at that point it's in the seam allowance both going this way and this way, okay? So I'm going to pull all these other pins off for a moment and first rock it towards the middle, and I'm going to move it until this point here is at that 1/2 inch mark, all right? So I'm going to put it back down because this is the widest part. That's my bicep area. That's where I need it wide. So from here up, I'm going to trace it. Until I hit this very top corner up here again, okay? Now I'm doing it this way because I want my cuff down here to stay the same size. So at this point, I'm going to move this pen down here about 5/8 inch in from where I stopped drawing that blue line, and I rock this back in so that it matches up down here. Okay. And just trace it up to where it meets up here. Okay, so I can pull this pin out now. So now that's the new line on this side. Now I'm going to go back up and put this pen back up in my little size appropriate circle up on top and rock it out this way so that I come over here about where this 1/2 inch line is. It doesn't have to be exact, but we want it to get close. I'm going to put a new pen over here, put a weight down just to hold it, and I'm going to start drawing right about where that bullseye is, maybe a little bit lower. Okay, so now I can pull out the pen on top, leave this one there, and rock it back in so it's going to come over here in line with where the bottom is. If I measure straight across here, okay, the width from corner to corner of the bottom of this sleeve is just over 9.5 inches, okay? If I put my ruler from this corner down here to up here, I'm going to put my little paper on top of it so I can see here, and I'm rocking it so I want this corner to end up just after 9.5 inches, which is right about there. All right, and then I'm going to put this pin in and trace down this side. Okay, then I can pull this one off, rock this down so it matches up or very closely to where this corner is, and go straight across. And the blue line is going to be my new sleeve. Now I need to come back, draw in where all of my little notches are, so I can rock this back over here and say, okay, there's a notch, and things like that. But where my blue line is, that's going to be my new sleeve. So what I did for this one, I'm going to do that. This is my, what is this? This is my back. I will do the same process for my front. So I will end up with 2 brand new sleeve patterns, and I can just put these away, but I'm going to put piece number 10, sleeve, back. So I have that on here, and cut 2. All right. Okay, so I just found a issue here. They don't want you to line this. And I think that if I was doing the entire thing out of a very heavy, like coat weight wool or something, I could possibly make that work. But this is pretty lightweight, and it needs to be lined. I mean, the whole purpose of this is a warmth kind of thing. So I will be, you know, modifying, but everywhere that the pattern says just to cut one of the blue fabric when it's for the main coat and the sleeves, I will be cutting that out of lining 2. And I'm just going to insert it like a regular jacket lining, I believe, at this point. You know, we have some specialty stuff going on here, so I'm not sure exactly, but we'll kind of figure it out as you go. But also, the length of this was very long. It would come down to the ground on me, so I took 6 inches off the length on the bottom of all the pieces, and I just cut that off the very bottom edge. So I just wanted to let you know about that. But yeah, they have no lining at all, which is odd, but just because they don't doesn't mean that I can't. So I will. Okay, so I have found something else that's kind of interesting here. It seemed like I had extra pieces, so I had to really read through all of the instructions and figure it out. And it turns out that the white on here of this collar and these cuffs that are shown, those are supposed to be detachable, okay? It's supposed to be an optional snap-on, snap-off feature. It's not a permanent part of the coat. So the facing of this, because there's a collar, there's a collar piece and a facing piece that both look very similar, okay? So the facing piece is out of the blue. The collar piece is going to be out of my fur, and I'm not sure if I'm doing double-sided in fur or not. And it's the same thing with these cuff-looking pieces. There is a facing that is out of the blue, and then there is one that just says cuff. I wrote lining on there because that's going to be out of the contrast, all right? So just a little bit confusing, and it doesn't really specify on here, but that's what the deal is. I'm guessing that you could substitute your contrast, which would be, like in my case, the fur for the facing, but I'm thinking I might as well make it removable, because if I ever do have to wash this, it would be easier to wash it without the fur on it. So there you go. So I've been basically cutting things out all day, it feels like. And so let me give you an update on my piles. The first one, which is the last one you saw, is my fur pile. So, you know, using the vacuum to clean around the edges. For the cuffs and collar and the back collar piece, this little piece, I have a layer of lining and a layer of the faux fur, okay? So for the ones on fold, you know, one of each. The ones that are separate, like the collar pieces, 2 of each. All right, so that is done. There is a whole selection of miscellaneous little pieces for the coat that only need the fashion fabric section. And then there is all of the main body pieces of the coat. I have cut out both the fashion fabric and the lining fabric. I decided against the flannel insert because I think it's going to be pretty heavy once I get it all put together, because this, this white fabric that I'm using as the lining, it feels almost, it's a very, very heavy, what I would call taffeta. And there may be a better word for it, but it feels like a very, very thick grosgrain ribbon, a very wide grosgrain ribbon, you know, with the thick, thick ridges. I'm not sure, well, that's not going to work there. You can see the ridges. I'm not sure of the actual fabric content. I could burn some of it. Let's do a little burn test because I am curious. What are you? Well, it's a natural fiber, I can tell you that. It might be a silk. It really might be a silk. I don't know, but it's very heavy. So because of that and the imitation suede stuff, I think it's going to be heavy enough without the flannel layer. So I have, of the sleeves and the main part of the coat, a layer of both that and the blue suede. And then lastly, they have this big piece to make shoulder pads, okay? So they have this big piece for you to cut out the different shapes from a batting and construct your shoulder pads. And after cutting out the lining and everything like that, I decided, you know what, I'm using ready-made shoulder pads. I held them up to their pattern, and my men's size ready-made shoulder pads are the same size as the ones that they are calling for to be made. And so I'm just going to use these. Now, the last piece is this big piece, which is to be cut out of lining fabric for shoulder pads. I'm not cutting that out. And the reason is because I am lining my entire dress. So my shoulder pads are going to be embedded between the regular lining layer and the fashion fabric layer. The way that they had the pattern put together, they would be exposed, so you'd need to cover your shoulder pads. But since I am not doing it that way, I don't need to have that little piece. So these are taking care of that issue. This last piece is just a guide for placement for something. I'm not too sure. It's some kind of a stay. And yeah, it's all cut out finally, except for the interfacing. Now the interfacing is going to be a woven interfacing. They actually, on the pattern, they call for muslin, but I have a interfacing that it is a woven. It's a very starched muslin basically, and I'll show you that when I cut those pieces out. But yeah, it's cut out, it's ready to go, and so I think I might call it a day for today and get started on the assembly tomorrow. See you then. Okay, next day. Actually, it's been a couple days. I was busy yesterday with other things, but I'm ready to do a little bit of work on this. And I've been looking at my pattern directions, and I think what my strategy is going to be, because I am lining this unlike what the directions say. It looks like we do the complete back first. So I'm going to do the complete black back in my blue suede fabric, and then do the complete back in my white lining fabric. And then I'm going to put those two together. So that's my plan. So the first thing is to start marking the back. And there are all kinds of interesting marks on here. There is a center strip that gets sewn down the back that we'll deal with in a bit. But we have a big dart that comes down here, a splice. There's another dart up here. So I will be getting, as I always do, my little scrap of leather and my hole puncher and get started punching out all of these circles. I will be clipping my notches, and there are circles here for placement, here for sleeves, here for something. I'm not even sure what this is, but all over. So just let me punch everything out first. Okay, so I have marked up my blue fabric and the lining fabric the same way. This is a big dart down here. There's another big dart up here. The blue fabric, because it is a suede-y knit, it's not going to unravel, so I'm not going to be serging around the edge of that. This one does unravel, so before I do anything, I'm going to serge all the way around the very edge of this white piece just to keep it from unraveling, and I'll be right back. All right, so now that it's serged, the first thing I'm going to do is the shoulder dart, which is putting a pin down in one dot, up in the next dot. And I have marked all of these on the wrong side. So the side I'm looking at is the wrong side. And I marked my blue fabric with just a regular chalk pencil because it'll show up on that blue really easily. And I've marked all my white with my heat erasable pen. So I'm going to go ahead and do kind of an assembly line and do all the shoulder darts at once. So I have one on each of the white and on each of the blue. So I'm going to just go ahead and stitch these and then press them. And how do we press these? Looks like we press them towards the center. So, all right. So since I'm going to be switching back and forth between threads, I decided to use two different sewing machines. I wanted to introduce you to, I'm going to name her Belle. It's a Belvedere Adler. It's from like the 1960s, and I saw her in a little antique store near here and just had to have her, so I bought her. And she's just a little straight stitch machine, but she is just gorgeous. So I'm going to be having her threaded up in my white thread to sew on the lining. And then over on the other side of my room over there, you can see my Meister, and I'm going to keep her with the royal blue for my other one. So I'm just going to be kind of switching back and forth this entire process, but having the two machines together is going to be really handy. So this is how she sews. She has a little knee lever instead of a presser foot, which is nice. And yes, I did backstitch at the point, but you know what? I feel like I can do that. So anyhow, she makes a really nice little stitch. See if you can see. Well, probably not because it's white on white, but trust me, she makes a nice little stitch. So there you go. This is Belle. All right, so the next thing to do is this dart in the middle. And before you can make that dart, you have to cut this. Now, this does not fray, so I can feel very comfortable cutting it. Just make sure before I do. Yes, I do need to. So I'm going to cut down this line and back up this line. And then make this dart just like normal. Sticking a pin in this circle, and the circle over here is actually right in that little spot where all the slices come together. So there's one pin. There's a very long dart right here, but it's part of that whole back shaping, so that's okay. And put the second one here, going down one dot, back up the next one. And the last one right here, going down one dot and up the next one. And that way when I push them all through, I get an exact mark. And I do draw the line all the way because that really helps when I am stitching it to make sure that I don't go off track because that's never fun. So anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and do this. Tuck these little pins in so they're not going to go off track, and I'm sewing from this dot up. There's a little bit of fabric below it, but as far as I know, I'm not sewing that. Let me double check really quick here. Nope, I don't. So you only sew this dart up to this dot. You don't go all the way to the bottom, okay? And I'm going to do this on both of my blue pieces and both of my lining pieces. All right, so I need to sew these together, the two back pieces. Oh, and this dart, once you have it stitched, you press it towards, this is the sleeve area here, so push it towards the side, not the center. This is the center. Now, I am concerned because this fabric wants to fray, so before I actually sew up my center seam on this, I am just putting some clear nail polish. You can put fray check, put whatever you want to along my little seam edge here, but just to keep it from ever wanting to stray, I'm going to do this to both sides. Once I have that done, I'm going to pin them together. All right, so this is my upper back here, and this is the right side. And I'm going to put my right sides together carefully and pin them together. If I can find where I left my pins, here they are. So I'm going to be sewing from this dot up here at 5/8 inch all the way down to the dart down here, which I ironed off, but it's the point where the stitching starts. Okay, so where this dart seam began, that's the point where my stitching line is going to go from here all the way up just to that point. Don't stitch above this, leave that part open. And I'm going to do the same seam on the blue fabric as soon as I get this one done. Okay, so this is what the back looks like right now. These are my 2 darts that come out, and this is my center seam, so you can kind of see how it all is working together. And after sewing this seam, you press it open so it's nice. Now what I need to do is fold this whole thing flat. Hang on a second. There was one marking that I did not transfer over because I'm going to do that right now. And that is a line that we need to baste down the back. So matching up these 2, and there's several little notches along the way, making sure the bottoms and tops are good. I'm going to draw a line starting right here where all this stitching is, okay? Let me find my little white pencil here. So starting at this dot right there, down here at the bottom, I am going to draw a mark 3.5 inches in from the edge. It should be right about here, okay? And I need to draw a straight line from this line to that mark down there. This is just easier for me to do it at this point than before because of all of the pressing and handling and everything. So now I have this line marked on, and once I have this pinned together with a needle and thread, I'm going to hand baste it all the way down this line because I will be pulling it out, okay? But once it's basted, then we need to press these open like a gigantic seam allowance here. But first, pinning it and hand basting it. And I'm going to do the same thing on the lining. So when I'm basting, I am taking fairly large stitches, anywhere from 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch long. I just want to keep it secure, but at the same time not overstress myself. So you can see that's a big old stitch there. But this fabric is a little hard to go through, and my waxed thread is not cooperating. So, you know, we'll just take our time. No rush, but I do want to get at least the back side of this coat finished today. Oh, that's just water. I got a drink of water and my hands were wet and touched it, and there you go. So now I know that if this coat goes out in the rain, the water will definitely show up on it. So, you know, there's another lesson learned. I had to get some more needles out. I actually, when I was making that last Chanel jacket, I think I broke like 6 needles while I was working on it. So had to get some more out, which means you have to clean them off because I'm trying to work through my old needles here. Aren't they fabulous? I love old needle books. But they usually have just a little bit of buildup or something. So, you know, getting the old Emery Strawberry is a good thing. And now I'm ready to go. So I'm keeping one needle threaded up with blue thread and another one with my super duper basting thread, if I can get it started here, with white thread, just because I have a feeling I'm going to be doing a decent amount of basting on this project. Okay, so this is what it looks like. It's been basted, and when I ironed it, all my mark disappeared here on my white, and I pressed it open so it looks like a huge seam allowance, okay? The next piece we're going to deal with is this piece number 2, And before I can work with it, of course, I do need to serge around the outside edge of the white one. All right, so the next piece, this piece number 2 here, it's a very long strip that's cut on a fold. And I'm going to be just placing it here. This strip is longer than this is. It's supposed to be that way, but we're going to go ahead and sew it 5/8 inch up both sides, you know, connecting both sides to the edge of here and stitching it at 5/8 all the way up. And then this part up here covers the bottom of all of this stuff. And we're going to be hand stitching it to the seam allowances and to the dart up here so that it's going to stay up where it needs to be. There is a notch right here where this pin is to match up this piece to this piece so that you can make sure the top is right. And when I matched up that notch, the bottom of mine is off by about 1 inch. It may have been a mistake when because you know I shortened it by about 6 inches everywhere, and I might not have cut this piece exactly right. Maybe it stretched out when I ironed it. I don't know. But it's about 1 inch too long on this side, so I'll just trim it after I have it all sewed on there and then serge over the edge just to even it out. But I also wanted to show you that when I lay this flat, pretty much it lines up over here where it is if you're just laying them flat together, but not exactly. So if you have a little bit of a pooch, that's okay, because as soon as all of this basting is taken out, it's going to spread just a hair, and that'll make it lay nice and flat. So I'm going to finish pinning this. And then I'll sew it, and everything I'm doing on this one, I'm going to do the exact same thing on the blue. Okay, so right now I have these long stitches done here. Excuse me. But before I attach it at the top, on the pattern piece, there's this little stitching line, okay? And that is this. So I've marked it on this side, and when you sew it, you're just going to sew one side and then stop, and then you're going to sew the other side. So let me flip it over here so you can see everything. It's easier for me to go ahead and mark it at this point on the wrong side, because that's what I'm going to be looking at when I'm sewing it, just to make sure that everything is where it should be. So I'm just kind of lining up my piece up here over the top of this, putting a little mark at the bottom of that stitching line there and at the top here, and then just connecting those like this. So over at Belle, I'm going to stitch up here and then come over here and stitch right there, and I'm going to do the same process on the blue one, of course. So I have this done, and I want to show you there's about a 1/2 inch from where all of this stitching up here, where the dart and the center back and everything came together, there's about a 1/2 inch between there and where this diagonal comes up. And when you look at it from the right side, it just looks like it's going to gape open. And it looks like in the directions we are moving on from here. So I am going to come back and stitch from where this diagonal stitch that we just made, from that point up, so it blends with this top center seam right there. And I think that's going to close up all of that stuff that you can see from the right side. Okay, so with this stitched, it looks like a lot more secure to me. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe this notch might not be in the right place or something, because I'm thinking, this is just me thinking here, that if I matched, if this notch was in the wrong place and it was actually supposed to be higher, this whole thing would shift up, which would mean that the point here where it comes together would actually be matching that. Okay, sorry about that. So anyhow, that's what I'm thinking, is that perhaps this whole thing should be shifted up so that this stitching line matches where all of this is supposed to come together. This is the lining, so it's not that big of a deal here, but that would explain why my bottom is slightly longer. Okay, so I think for my blue one, that's what I'm going to do, just so that everything comes together at that one point. But with all of that done, now I'm going to cut my loose threads, obviously, and stitch up here and here just to hold this piece up. And you know what? I'm probably going to put a little bit of stitch witchery under these two little corners and just tack them up there, just so that they don't want to flop down and get in my way. It's not a permanent deal, but it's enough to keep it neat while I'm working on it. Okay, I'm going to show you what this side looks like here. This is the blue, and it's kind of funny because even though I shifted that little panel piece on the inside up a bit, I still ended up having this mark the stitching line slightly lower than I wanted, but you know, is what it is. I have stitched it to my dart and seam allowances just very crudely, but it's going to be hidden, so that's fine. I did not put the stitch witchery on this side, and that is because this is very, well, it's not super drapey, but it moves enough that I didn't want anything to tug it and possibly make it look odd in a spot. So no stitch witchery here, just on the lining side. And the last part of this back piece is a neck piece. This is it. I have two of them cut out of my blue fabric. And before you attach it, remember we didn't sew up all the way to the neck here. And what they want you to do is press this under at 5/8 of an inch. Like this. So I will very carefully mark that and press that under in just a minute. But first, I need to put interfacing on one of my neck pieces. One of them is going to be the facing and one of them is not. It's kind of neat how it comes down to a point. That's going to fit like right there. So I'm going to put the one that's in the facing, which is not interfaced, aside for a moment. And the interfacing that I'm going to be using is a woven non-fusible interfacing. That is what the pattern calls for. So I'll show you what I have. I have no idea where I got it. It's been a long time. So it's basically a very starched muslin. If you don't have this, just, you know, starch a muslin up, and I think that would be okay for now. But what I need to do is place this on the wrong side of one of my pieces and hand baste all the way around the edge about 1/4 of an inch in, and that's going to hold it. Once I have it basted on, then I'll go back and put my markings on. All right, so this is what it looks like. Just baste it around the edges. Getting my lint off. I can tell I'm going to need to vacuum. So we need to do some marking here. And on the pattern piece, there is a little center mark here and a little triangle, which is a shoulder mark. And these are both at a seam line, a 5/8 inch seam line. Okay, and we're going to have to be drawing some seam lines. So it's time to cut another piece off of my measuring tape, because these are 5/8 of an inch wide, and this is an old one that got chewed up by one of my pets years ago. So I just kind of take a chunk off of it when I need to draw a piece. So this is I just kind of lay it along the edge, draw a little line, connect it, and you need to have this line fairly clear because we're going to be matching it up. So it comes down to this dot. Okay, you can see how that is, and then I'm going to come up the other way. We're going to do the same thing on here from this point up to here, okay? Because I need to make sure that when I fold this at exactly 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to be doing this again, all the way down. All right, so I can connect these and I have my seam line, so that way when I go over to my ironing board to fold it, I can fold it with my mark exactly at the edge and press that. All right, so I have these pressed. Now I had to remark my little dot there because it had kind of worn down. This dot is this triangle right here, okay? And that is important because it's going to match up with this dot. So you can see I have pressed it along that line and there too, so that if you look at it on the inside, it's just pressed down like that. I still have this seam allowance pressed open, so it's a little bit open there, okay? So flipping it back down and watching it from this side, I'm just going to kind of, whoops, I forgot to finish marking it on this side. Let me do that really quick. Alrighty, so this is marked now. So we're just gonna kind of slide it underneath. So I'm gonna match up this dot to this dot, and that should make this line up well. It looks like I have a little bit of a gap there. At this point, I'm not going to worry about it because when I do make this seam like this, it's going to hide that. So if I can stretch it out later, I will. But for right now, I'm just going to match up those two dots. I'm going to match up the center seam here with that center dot. And then I'm going to do the same thing, matching up this dot over here to this dot. And it's the same thing where I have a little bit of spacing here where it's flat. I'm not going to worry about that. So doing it this way instead of a regular seam, I think is because we need to kind of work this curve in, which would be very difficult doing it as a regular seam. So this wants to press, this part here wants to press straight. This has a curved line. So I'm just kind of forming it here. And actually, if you can see, there's a bubble there. But if I push that bubble out, it's going to be even more out there. So I am just going to scoot it back, split the difference, and ease it as I go. So matching up my edge here with the line that I drew and making this curve. You know what I think? I just had a thought. If I make my curve a little more extreme and accentuated, it's going to take out all that little extra. Plus it'll be a little more stylistic. So that's what I'm doing. I'm making my curve curvier, just like me. So sorry you're watching me do this whole thing. So I'm going to pin this side over here just like that, but you can kind of see it's just kind of laying it on top. And then I'm going to come back with my sewing machine and do a top stitching, like a 1/16 of an inch edge stitching, and I'll show you that when I do it. Alrighty, over here at my Meister machine, my main machine here, and I'm getting ready to sew this. And it's still kind of frustrating me because on the pattern picture, this is a very straight line, you know? But when I look at the diagram on the instructions, it just doesn't seem exactly right. But you know what? I'm going to go with it this way. If it turns out it's terribly wrong, I will find that out later. But I wanted to show you, I'm going to be top stitching this on here. And I'm using my edge stitch foot. It's this one. I've used it a lot, probably seen it. But it's nice when you have your edge stitching things with two different levels of thickness. It just makes it so much easier to keep nice and straight and everything, because this little blade here, it's set at 1/16 of an inch out. So it's going to keep my distance very uniform. So I'm just gonna run this blade along the edge. Until I come all the way down to this little point. And then I'm going to keep watching until I get to that seam. And it looks like right there is where I hit the seam. So I can lift it up and turn it and come back up here. And you don't need this foot, you know, it's just fun. And I like fun feet. So there you go. And my machine is a high shank machine, so, you know, I can get the industrial feet that fit this. So there's a lot of them to choose from, so that's nice. Okay, so now this is what it looks like. You know, it's kind of thick, so that's why it looks like it's pooching out there a bit. But I have my nice little back of my neck. And I'm going to be doing the same thing on my lining layer, my white layer. I will just be using the piece that does not have interfacing, because when I put it together, I'm going to put all the facings onto my white layer. And then I will attach the entire two together. So pretend that I just did this whole thing onto the white layer with the little blue collar. It'll be blue. And then that will be it for the back piece. So this is, of course, the blue. And I have her just kind of pinned up here. Whoops, sorry about that. Pinned up here on one dress form. And this is where it all comes together. I'm not going to open up this basting until later. I think that it's fine leaving it that way. It'll get it used to hanging that way. And then over on this side of the room, it's like we have two different rooms going on here. I have the lining going on. So right now I have the collar sewn on to my lining. This is the one without interfacing. And this is my lining. You can actually probably see the detail on the lining one better than on the blue, just because of the fabric. So that's where we are right now. I am going to call it a night on this project, and next time I'll start up on the front pieces. Good morning. Welcome to the next day. And I am in a dilemma, and let me explain to you. Okay. So looking at this pattern here, it's a beautiful coat, isn't it? Isn't that a beautiful coat? You know what? It's not a coat, it's a dress. Isn't that crazy? It's a dress. It's a pull over your head, side zippered or side snapped dress. And it would have been nice if I had read through the instructions first, so I'd be like more aware of this and everything. But this morning I just got out my instructions and say, okay, let's work on the front. What does it look like? And I realized, wait a minute, I have to sew straight up the front of the skirt. So, you know, having a think here, getting a cup of tea and just thinking about it, I've gone into this thing as a coat. And for me, for day to day, you know, putting it on to feel fabulous, but going out and about, I think that this would work better as a coat. I don't think I would have very many places to wear a blue suede silk taffeta lined fur collared dress, but I might be able to get away with that as a coat. So long story short, I have been thinking about this, and I am going to change a few things in this pattern so that the front is open, so there is no side snap or zipper or whatever they have going. I haven't even gotten that far. And that it just closes with a couple buttons in the front, kind of like what I thought it was going to do right here, okay? But yeah, this whole seam right here, that's supposed to be sewed closed. This is supposed to be like Winter Wonderland dress. So with that as a thought, if I was to make this a dress, and it looks like to me that this collar, if you know you weren't popping it up for dramatic effect, would fall down. We'll know more later. If I was making it out of a more standard winter wool type of fabric or something, and not as over the top as, you know, royal blue suede looking fabric, I could see myself making it as a dress. But my project, we're going to modify the construction method. The pieces will be the same, but just open in the front instead of closed in the front, closed in the side instead of open in the side, and things like that. So with that, let's look at the instructions. Okay, so this is where we stopped yesterday. you know, and then today was going to be starting the front. And to me, it looks like the construction of the main panels, I'm going to leave the same, okay? Where it's going to be different is all of this, where you sew the center front together. I am not going to do that. And the interfacing piece of piece 8, I'm going to extend this piece, so instead of just coming like this, it's going to come all the way down to the bottom, so it's one big interfacing, so it's like a standard facing. And I'll probably make it whatever width this is, I'll just continue that same width the entire length of it. And that means I'm going to need to either add on to the little facing piece I cut, or cut a whole new one that's going to be the same size as this with the extended cut. Okay, I think once I do that, I should be able to just kind of proceed from there. But this totally explains why it wasn't lined and why I was so confused why a coat wouldn't be lined. It's because it's not a coat. So looking at it as a dress, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So all of that aside, we are going to be doing some bound buttonholes, you know, which is nice and everything, but I think that this is going to be my strategy. So I'm going to rework these front-facing pieces, piece number 8, where there is a fabric and an interfacing. All right, so this little piece here is piece 8, and you can see that it matches up with my very center front piece perfectly, right up to, you know, about that point. So what I am going to do is I think I have enough fabric. Let me move a piece down here. And I can't just go straight down the front because it does kind of curve like that. It's a very shapy dress. So what I'm going to do is just use basically this whole edge here, outline it all the way down, because look down here, you can see that it kind of comes in and goes out. So I'm just going to outline this whole thing, and then once I have that done, I'll show you what it looks like on the inside. And this is on a fold, all right? And so what I'm going to be doing is just slicing this open straight down the side. You can see I have my edge here, and it kind of curves in and out and down to the bottom. And this is where the bottom of my piece is. So I'm just going to cut this, slice this open, and then I will use this piece to also cut out interfacing. So I'm going to have 2 of these and 2 of the interfacing. So I need to fast forward to buttons, and this pattern calls for 4 buttons, but because bound buttonholes and all that goes along with that, I need to designate exactly which buttons I'm going to be using right now so I can size my bound buttonhole and everything to the right size. And you know, this is a fabulous outfit. I've got so many like wildly exciting buttons and everything, but trying to think of what's going to go. And I think because of the fur and everything, I'm actually going to gravitate more towards the silverish tones than the gold ones. So I can weasel those out. And that puts me down to wildly sparkly, because you know, how often do you get a chance to use these? And I would, but I really think this calls for a shank button because of the thickness and everything. So these are not a shank button, so they're going away, which leaves me with either like royal crest type buttons or cameo with a pearl back kind of buttons. And I think I'm going to go with these big boys, these royal crest looking buttons. They just look amazing enough to carry off on this this pattern. You know, sometimes you have a whole bunch of really neat buttons, but you need an equally dramatic fabric and equally dramatic pattern to make them work. So, you know, I will be using those. So with this, now I can figure out my bound buttonhole exact dimensions and everything like that. All right, so with all of that and with what I'm doing being different and everything, I'm going to need to change the order of some things. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and actually do all the darts and everything on the lining piece first and get it out of the way. So let me pull this apart so I can punch all of the circles, because we have a dart and some other markings. Now, I'm not putting the buttonhole marks onto my lining, just all of this. But just like yesterday, I do need to serge all the way around my lining pieces before I do that. So I'm going to pull this off, serge around these, and then we'll be back to mark them. Okay, so I want to show you how I'm going to work this thing, which is very different from how the other directions are going to say. So this is my little facing I cut. Now, with this garment, you would think the inner facing gets applied to the facing. No, no, no. The inner facing, actually, it's a sewn-on inner facing, and it will be hand-stitched to the blue main piece here, okay? Just the inner facing. Now, the facing, I am going to attach to the lining. And at first I was going to trim this piece down and sew it here, you know, so it's just one layer. But I'm going to leave the entire lining piece, because I think that's going to add a little more stability, and I want that. So what I'm going to have to do is go over to the ironing board and press under the edge of my facing that I made. Oh, probably, you know, a fat 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch, all the way down. And let me go do that first, and I'll be right back. Alrighty, I'm back. So what I'm going to do is very carefully pin this outside edge. Move these over here. So that it matches up with my lining edge. And then once I know that this part is where I want it to be, I'm going to pin this down up here. And I will be edge stitching this down the entire way. Probably, you know, just like we did at the back neck of the back piece, about a 1/16 of an inch in. I'll probably use my little special foot, but sew this down, and then I will, while I'm at the sewing machine, I might as well go ahead and machine stitch this all the way around here. I will do it probably closer to about a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, just so that there is no chance of those stitches showing, just to permanently adhere my little blue facing piece to my lining piece. Okay, so this is what my lining looks like. This is just one. The other one is obviously opposite, but I have my blue just stitched on, so you can kind of see where it's stitched on right there, and just all the way around the edge I did a little straight stitch. Okay, so now what I need to do is transfer the markings for these two funky darts onto my piece, and they're kind of awkward. So after I punched the little holes that go with my piece, I drew where the lines continue so I can see. So I'm not sure if you can see, but there's like an oval, and it looks like on this funky dart they come back together right about at 5/8 of an inch from the edge, so that when you make this seam, you'll get the complete dart down to a point. This dart, the leg for my size, it looks like it intersects with that point, so that when everything is sewed together, you have two lines coming together to a point at 5/8 of an inch away from the edge. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and draw these on. I am not worrying about all of the notches and everything at this point. I just want to get this part straightened out. So actually, you know what I need to do is punch one more hole right here where all of those things are intersecting. So let me stick my little leather piece under there, because that's going to give me the point, a guide point to make it all work out. So there's that. On this dart, I can mark that one with that color, but these are on the white, so I will mark these with my red heat erasable pen. Now up here, I'm also marking where this leg is coming up to, and you know what I need to do is punch a hole at the end of this leg, because these darts don't go all the way to the end, they just kind of do. So we're going to draw this whole thing here. Alright, so there's my lines. Let's see if we can make sense of this. So on this one, it's coming out like this to this point here. And I will be sewing one dart at a time. I think I will start with this oval shaped one and then do this one. And then this dart ends at this point. So like that. And then over here I have this line. Alright, so that's how my darts are going to work out. So what I'm going to do is, oh my gosh, I just realized I marked these on the wrong side. This is the right side of my fabric. I should have marked them over here. Well, I'm going to do that off camera. You don't need to see that again, but I will be marking them the exact same way, just on this side. Alright, so now that I've redrawn them on the wrong side here, I'm going to be creating this dart first. So I stick my pin down one side, up the other side, push these two together, and then over on the very far edges, this is kind of thick because I've got several layers going on here. I'm going to pin those. Enough suede stuff. It's not real suede, it's imitation, you know. It's still thick. Alright. And then I'm going to tuck these pins in here, and I have the nice little guideline to follow. And since this is on the blue area, I'm going to be sewing this in my blue thread. Okay, so I start up here and come down like that. Okay, so with this one sewed, now I'm going to get a longer pin and do the same thing with this side. So down one, up the next, like this. And also these two ending points, the one we marked here that's out in the middle of the fabric should go over here towards the end. And just fold that. You know, I'm going to do the best I can because it is kind of thick because I'm going over an edge and everything, but it is the lining, so we are a little bit forgiving here. And if it's not perfect, that's okay. And when I do iron this, all of my little red marks are going to disappear, so that's fabulous too. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and sew this one. Alright, so this is what it looks like. And I feel like it's not quite perfect, but I think it's close enough. I had a lot of layers and thicknesses and edges and stuff going on in there. But I think that's good enough. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other lining piece exactly the same way. Alright, so I have the lining layer all finished, and it's over sitting on my dress form just waiting for me. And now I need to start my front piece of the blue fabric. And this is the woven interfacing that I cut out. It is the same size and shape as the blue facing that we sewed onto the lining. And this I am just going to, kind of like we did with the blue facing, place it on here, carefully pin around the edges, and then I'm going to come back and stitch just around the edges, not this way, obviously, because that would show up terribly on the outside. But all around the outside edge, just with a straight stitch to hold it on really well. So this is what it looks like, and I have transferred my dart markings to the wrong side, I learned this time, of this piece, and over here my facing was wide enough that I was able to secure it over here, which is actually really good because this is where I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of bound buttonhole stuff, so it's good that it has that to keep it from wanting to move on me. But I'm going to go ahead and on both of my blue front pieces make these darts up just like I did on the lining.
Living my bucolic life, free healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.